What happens when a royal Christmas turns into a war zone? When the doors of Windsor Castle swing open, and the future king himself tells his own brother, "You are not welcome?" Imagine walking into the most iconic holiday celebration of the year, the halls glittering with gold, the scent of roasted chestnuts and pine filling the air, only to realize that you, the second-born prince of the realm, have been shut out. This is not a fairy tale. This is Christmas 2025 in the British royal family, and it's a story that no one saw coming. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Just days before Christmas, whispers began circulating through the palace corridors. Some said it was a misunderstanding, a minor clash of schedules. Others, the ones who know the inner workings of the monarchy better than anyone, hinted at something far more explosive. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, had allegedly shown up unannounced at the royal family's private Christmas celebration. The palace staff, the aides, even the security detail, everyone had their eyes wide open, waiting for the unthinkable. And then it happened. Prince William, the future king, reportedly stepped forward and made the decision that would shock the world. Harry was not welcome. You might think that this is just another tabloid exaggeration, another story to fill the holidays with gossip. But in the days leading up to the event, the tension had been building for months, even years. The rift between William and Harry has been well documented, from the very public interviews, the subtle barbs in official statements, to the quiet moments that no one saw, until now. And what happened that night was not just a disagreement over protocol. It was a clash of identities, loyalties, and perhaps the deepest wounds in a royal family already splintered by past scandals. Picture the scene. The grand halls of Windsor, decorated meticulously for the festive season. Every ornament, every candle, every table setting had been curated to perfection. Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, moved through the rooms, her smile polite, but her eyes scanning for signs of trouble. The staff whispered among themselves, their hearts pounding, aware that something unprecedented was about to unfold. For years, they had been trained to anticipate the unexpected, but nothing in their experience could prepare them for a royal Christmas turning into a confrontation between brothers. Harry's arrival was described by insiders as calm, yet defiant. He walked through the gates as if he belonged, yet he knew, everyone knew, that he was walking into a storm. Dressed in understated attire, blending formality with casual ease, he was a stark contrast to the polished perfection of the rest of the family. His presence was a question, a challenge, and a reminder that the past can never truly be left behind. And in that moment, the atmosphere shifted. Guards stiffened. Aides froze. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. What was going through William's mind as he saw his younger brother approach? Some say it was a mix of disbelief, anger, and a fierce protectiveness over the sanctity of the royal image. Others whisper that it was about control, the need to assert authority not just as the heir to the throne, but as the one who dictates the boundaries of family loyalty. The confrontation, though private, was a storm brewing in silence, and no one, least of all Harry, could have predicted how it would unfold. Kate's role in the evening cannot be underestimated. As always, she was the stabilizing force, the one tasked with smoothing the edges of tension before they cut too deep. Behind her composed expression, she was calculating, negotiating silently, trying to balance diplomacy with empathy. But even her presence could not entirely prevent the friction that had been simmering for years from igniting. Every glance, every word, every hesitation carried weight, and as the night progressed, it became clear that this was not just a family dispute. It was a public spectacle in waiting. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, was aware of every move. Though miles away, her influence was felt in texts, in calls, and in the decisions Harry made leading up to that night. Was she advising caution, encouraging defiance, or simply watching, letting history play itself out while knowing that the world was about to witness another royal drama unfold? The truth is, no one outside their inner circle will ever know the full extent, and that secrecy is part of what makes this story so tantalizing, so impossible to look away from. The palace staff had prepared meticulously, anticipating minor disruptions, perhaps an awkward exchange or two. What they did not prepare for was the kind of storm that breaks protocol, challenges hierarchy, and forces every family member to confront not just each other, but their own expectations and loyalties. The air was thick with tension, almost tangible, as if the glittering decorations themselves were watching, witnessing the history being written in real time. In the first minutes of Harry's appearance, nothing had erupted yet, but the signs were there. Subtle shifts in body language, quick glances, whispered instructions. Every member of the royal household understood that the night could tilt in any direction, and the stakes were monumental. This was not just about one Christmas dinner. This was about power, pride, and the fragile balance between public image and private emotion. And then, the first crack appeared. A comment, a glance, a slight misstep in protocol. What seemed like a minor infraction to the casual observer was, to the royals, a seismic event. William, known for his disciplined, sometimes rigid adherence to tradition, was reportedly infuriated. The aides tried to intervene, subtly, without drawing attention. But it was too late. Harry, by showing up unannounced, had challenged not only his brother's authority, but also the unspoken rules that governed centuries of royal behavior. Imagine the conversations behind closed doors. The urgency in the voice of the security chief. The whispered warnings between the senior aides. The private strategies being devised on the fly. Every word mattered. Every decision could change the course of the evening, and by extension, the story that would reach millions worldwide. And all the while, Harry remained poised, determined, aware of the eyes on him, aware that his every action would be scrutinized, dissected, and debated in the tabloids and on social media for weeks to come. And what did William do? According to insiders, he took a step that was as shocking as it was unprecedented. He asked Harry to leave. Or at least, he made it clear that Harry's presence was not welcome. Can you imagine that? A future king, at the pinnacle of tradition, turning his brother away from a family celebration at Christmas? The audacity, the tension, the drama. It was a moment that would ripple across the monarchy and into the hearts of millions who had followed this family's story for years. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A confrontation was imminent. Words would be exchanged. Loyalties would be tested. And in that moment, Christmas 2025 became more than just a holiday. It became a chapter in royal history that would be dissected for decades. The question now is, what would Harry do in the face of such rejection? Would he walk away quietly, preserving the fragile threads of family unity? Or would he respond in a way that ensured this Christmas would be remembered not for its festivities, but for its drama, tension, and the raw emotion of two brothers at odds? And for you watching this, you have to ask yourself, if you were in Harry's shoes, would you have stepped through that door, knowing you might be turned away? Would you have chosen silence or confrontation? This is more than royal gossip. This is a story about family, pride, and the choices that define us, even in the most glittering, golden halls of Windsor. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air shift? Felt a silent charge that made every breath heavier, every movement a little more cautious? That's exactly what happened in the grand halls of Windsor Castle just hours before Christmas 2025. The castle, adorned in shimmering gold and festive lights, looked perfect from the outside. Every garland hung with precision, every candle lit to perfection. It was a picture of holiday perfection, but behind those polished doors, tension was simmering like a storm waiting to break. The staff had been preparing for weeks. From the chefs rehearsing the perfect roast goose to the butlers arranging crystal glasses and silverware with surgical precision, everything was in place. On the surface, it was the Christmas every royal household dreams of. But the palace has its secrets. The whispers, the subtle glances, the barely audible mutterings in the corridors, they all spoke of something more. Something that even the glittering decorations couldn't conceal. William, as always, was at the center of it. The Duke of Cambridge, poised, controlled, a man who lives by schedule and protocol, walked through the halls with an intensity that was palpable. He inspected every detail, not the decorations, not the lights, but the energy of the room. The aides noticed immediately. He wasn't just checking on the guests or the timing of the celebrations. He was scanning for disruptions, for chaos lurking just beneath the surface. And he knew, instinctively, that tonight, the storm would come from one place, Harry. Kate moved through the rooms beside him, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the rising tension. She smiled politely at the staff, adjusted a ribbon here, straightened a place setting there, but her eyes told a different story. She saw the tension before anyone else. She knew the stakes. If Harry arrived unannounced, what would that mean for the carefully curated image of the family? Could she mediate? Could she prevent a confrontation? These were questions that raced through her mind even as she positioned the last poinsettia centerpiece with perfect grace. Even the palace guards could feel it. Standing rigid by the doors, they sensed the unusual energy. Protocol dictated that they remain impassive, but human instincts are hard to suppress. Something was coming, and it wasn't just another Christmas party guest. Every eye in the castle seemed to flicker with the same thought. What if the rumors were true? What if Harry really showed up? And then there was Harry himself, though he was still miles away. Across continents, whispers of his intent had already reached the palace. He had made it clear, this Christmas, he would appear. He didn't send a formal invitation request. He didn't notify anyone officially. He simply planned to arrive. To some, this was reckless. To others, it was bold. And for William, it was a challenge. A direct question to his authority, his role as the future king, and his control over the family narrative. The staff began to feel the tension seep into their own movements. Conversations in hushed tones stopped mid-sentence. Cooks froze in the kitchens, wondering if they should hold back on the champagne until the air cleared. Even the animals, the royal corgis, seemed to sense the anxiety, padding softly across the polished floors as if aware that tonight, the rules of normal would be suspended. Hours passed, and the tension only grew. The usual chatter and laughter of pre-Christmas excitement were replaced with anticipation tinged with unease. Every sound, the clink of silver, the subtle shift of a chair, the distant echo of a door closing, felt amplified. It was as though the castle itself were holding its breath. William retreated briefly into a private sitting room, consulting with his closest advisors. They reviewed guest lists, security protocols, and contingency plans. Nothing in the records suggested Harry's arrival, yet every piece of intelligence hinted that it was coming. One aide spoke quietly. If he shows, it won't be just a greeting. He's not here to be polite. William's jaw tightened. He didn't need reminders. He had already anticipated the disruption, already envisioned the scene in his mind. Meanwhile, Kate tried to keep things light, glancing at William and suggesting minor adjustments. Perhaps a touch more tinsel here, she said softly. But her words barely penetrated the armor of William's concentration. He was calculating, strategizing, preparing for the moment when the doors would open and Harry would step inside. Every possible scenario ran through his mind. A brief confrontation, a silent walk-away, a dramatic argument in the main hall. And somewhere deep down, he knew that none of the possibilities were simple. The palace staff had their own roles to play. Some were tasked with monitoring entrances, some with coordinating the arrival of late guests, and others with preparing for emergencies, though none had imagined one that involved the royal brothers at odds in such a direct way. They whispered among themselves, careful to remain unnoticed, sharing nervous glances that reflected the uncertainty of the night ahead. Even the most seasoned staff members, who had seen decades of royal pomp and ceremony, felt a prickle of unease. As night fell, the castle transformed into a tableau of elegance. Candles flickered in the windows, the halls shimmered in golden light, and the air was rich with the scent of pine and freshly baked treats. It should have been a scene of peace and joy, yet underneath it all, tension hummed like electricity before a storm. And then, almost imperceptibly, a message arrived. The prince had left his residence. He was on his way. That simple fact sent a ripple through the castle. Guards adjusted their positions. Aides straightened, some clutching notes, others glancing at watches. William, who had been pacing the room, stopped abruptly, his gaze narrowing. Kate's smile faltered for the briefest of moments. Even the portraits lining the walls seemed to bear witness to the anticipation, as if centuries of royal history were converging on a single, fateful evening. What made it all so tense was not just Harry's arrival. It was what it represented. It was a challenge to authority, a test of patience, and a provocation to the carefully maintained image of family unity. It wasn't just a Christmas party. It was a high-stakes game of protocol, pride, and power, played out in the gilded halls where kings and queens have debated the fate of nations. And in that silence, everyone knew, when the door finally opened, when Harry stepped through, nothing would be the same. A single moment, a single word, a single gesture could tip the balance. The calm before the storm was almost unbearable, every heartbeat louder than the last, every breath more measured. The castle waited. The staff waited. William waited. And across town, Harry moved closer to the gates that would test every ounce of control the family could muster. The question on everyone's mind was simple yet terrifying. What would happen the moment the brothers faced each other? Would there be a polite exchange, a fleeting smile, a quick hug to appease appearances? Or would the tension erupt into something much more dramatic, something that would be whispered about in royal circles for decades to come? And most importantly, how would the family and the world respond to the unfolding drama? Have you ever shown up somewhere you weren't supposed to be? And not just anywhere, but the heart of one of the most scrutinized families in the world? That was Prince Harry's audacious move on Christmas 2025. The Duke of Sussex, known for his charisma and his streak of rebellion, had decided that he would attend the royal family's private Christmas celebration. Without warning, without invitation, and without the blessing of the future king himself. Imagine the scene. The golden glow of Windsor Castle's halls, the polished floors reflecting the flicker of candlelight, the air fragrant with pine, cinnamon, and roasting chestnuts. It was a scene of perfection, a holiday postcard brought to life. But as Harry's car approached the grand gates, something invisible shifted. The guards stiffened, communication radios clicked quietly in the background, and whispers rippled through the staff like a warning in the wind. Harry stepped out of the car. His posture was calm, collected, yet his eyes carried the unmistakable weight of determination. The casual elegance of his outfit, a dark overcoat, understated tie, polished shoes, stood in stark contrast to the formal grandeur surrounding him. This wasn't a royal formal entrance. It was a deliberate statement. A silent announcement. I am here, and I will not be ignored. Inside the castle, William's mood was a complex blend of disbelief, irritation, and calculation. He had anticipated disruptions, yes, but nothing quite like this. The younger brother, who had spent years navigating the delicate dance between public scrutiny and private loyalty, had crossed an invisible line. William's first instinct was protocol: stop him, politely redirect him, maintain dignity. But instinct alone would not suffice. Harry was moving forward, confident, unflinching, and entirely unafraid. Kate, ever the diplomat, stepped in, her presence a soothing contrast to the tension. She greeted staff members, subtly directed them to maintain calm, and positioned herself where she could influence the situation without drawing attention. Her mind was racing. How to diffuse potential conflict. How to prevent an all-out confrontation. Every decision she made carried weight, not just for the evening, but for the reputation of the monarchy and the unity of the family. The castle staff, trained for all manner of royal crises, were suddenly faced with a situation that tested every ounce of their experience. Some had anticipated logistical issues, lost invitations, misplaced gifts, last-minute menu changes. But a royal intruder? A prince appearing unannounced, with the potential to ignite decades of tension? That was a scenario they had only imagined in their worst-case contingency drills. As Harry moved closer to the entrance, aides whispered to each other. He's going to make them react. He always does. Do we intercept him or let this play out? Every choice carried risk. Letting him through meant chaos could unfold inside. Stopping him risked public backlash, a royal scandal the tabloids would devour before Christmas morning. Inside the castle, William was now fully aware of the approaching storm. The tension in the room was almost physical. Staff moved quietly, subtly signaling to security, adjusting positions without drawing attention. Kate positioned herself strategically, anticipating the moment Harry's presence would confront the family's careful planning and polished facade. When the doors finally opened, Harry walked in, and for the first few seconds, the castle seemed suspended in a fragile silence. Guards straightened. Aides froze mid-step. Even the walls, lined with centuries of royal portraits, seemed to observe, the eyes of past monarchs witnessing a new chapter of family tension unfolding in real time. The moment their eyes met, the air crackled. What followed next would break the fragile veneer of composure. A quiet word, a shifted stance, a silent message delivered not through speech but through body language, sent the confrontation into a new, unpredictable phase. Even Kate, experienced and poised, felt the subtle tremor of the moment. She realized that this Christmas was no longer about festivities. It was about reckoning, about history being written in real time, and about two brothers whose personal history had just collided with tradition in the most explosive way. And as the tension reached its peak, a voice from the staff, quiet but deliberate, reminded everyone that this was more than a family argument. It was a spectacle that would ripple across the monarchy, across media channels, and into public consciousness. Every second mattered. Every reaction would be remembered. And the next move, by either William or Harry, would determine the tone of the night, the future of their relationship, and perhaps the legacy of the monarchy itself. Have you ever been caught in the eye of a storm, where every word you speak could either calm the chaos or make it explode? That was Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, on Christmas 2025. As the tension between William and Harry escalated in the glittering halls of Windsor Castle, she found herself in a precarious position. She was not just an observer. She was the mediator, the bridge, and sometimes the only person capable of holding a semblance of control over what threatened to become an uncontrollable family spectacle. The scene was almost cinematic. Golden candlelight reflecting off polished floors, walls lined with centuries of portraits observing silently, and a family divided in the center of it all. William's jaw was set, his gaze unwavering, every muscle taut with authority. Harry, calm yet defiant, stood his ground, eyes flashing with emotion that only those closest to him could read. And there was Kate, poised, composed, and acutely aware that one wrong step could shatter the fragile balance of the night. Kate had been observing subtle cues all evening. The tightening of William's fists, the slight tilt of Harry's head, the way staff moved nervously around the room. All of it told her more than words ever could. She knew that while William represented authority and protocol, Harry represented defiance and unresolved grievances. And in that delicate intersection, she had to operate with precision. She began with gentle interventions. A soft word here, a redirecting gesture there. "Shall we move to the dining room?" she suggested, voice calm but assertive. It was a carefully calculated attempt to shift the energy, to guide the brothers toward a more controlled environment. Her role was subtle but essential. She was not there to take sides, but to prevent escalation. Every word, every movement, carried enormous weight. Yet even Kate's diplomacy had its limits. Harry's presence was not just a challenge to William. It was a test of her own abilities as a stabilizing force in the family. She was caught between loyalty to her husband, concern for her extended family, and the knowledge that this moment could define how the world perceived the monarchy. Could she prevent a confrontation without appearing weak? Could she maintain composure while managing the emotional currents swirling between the two brothers? The palace staff, trained for decades in protocol and discretion, relied on Kate's cues. Her calm demeanor gave them a reference point. Every subtle glance, every controlled movement, communicated reassurance and guidance. They knew that if Kate could maintain her composure, the family might yet navigate the storm without catastrophe. But the emotional stakes were intense. Kate was fully aware that she was in the center of a web of historical grievances, public scrutiny, and personal loyalty. She had seen hints of tension in previous years, subtle disagreements that could have escalated but hadn't, until now. This was no ordinary holiday dinner. This was a reckoning, and she was in the eye of it. She also had to consider the optics. The cameras might not be present in the private halls, but the eyes of the world were everywhere. Social media would dissect every gesture, every facial expression, every nuance of interaction. The world would judge not just the brothers, but her ability to mediate, to maintain grace under pressure. In essence, she was managing two fronts, the immediate emotional crisis and the broader public perception. As the conversation between William and Harry continued, Kate employed every tool at her disposal. She used subtle humor to defuse tension, suggesting minor distractions, a comment about a misplaced ornament, a gentle reminder about the festive menu. She invoked shared memories, hinting at past holiday celebrations to remind the brothers of familial bonds. Her approach was a blend of psychology, intuition, and careful observation. Even so, the storm was relentless. Harry's calm defiance contrasted sharply with William's controlled authority, creating a push-pull dynamic that kept Kate constantly adjusting. She had to anticipate reactions, sometimes before the words were spoken. A small gesture, a hand on the shoulder, a tilt of the head, a soft word, could redirect the course of the confrontation. And she did all this while maintaining the image of composure and elegance that the royal family's public persona demanded. There were moments when Kate's own emotions threatened to surface. She felt frustration at the persistence of conflict, concern for her family's unity, and empathy for Harry's desire for inclusion. Yet she had no room for personal emotion. Every reaction had to be measured, every decision strategic. Her internal dialogue was rapid fire. Intervene here, redirect there, maintain neutrality, signal reassurance, prevent escalation. As the minutes ticked by, the subtle power of her presence became increasingly evident. William and Harry, despite their tension, were both aware of her influence. Her calm authority created pauses in their verbal sparring, giving them moments to reconsider, to breathe, to gauge the consequences of their next words. Kate's role was invisible, yet indispensable. Without her, the confrontation might have spiraled into an irreparable rupture. The staff watched in quiet awe. Kate's ability to mediate under extreme pressure, to read both brothers simultaneously, and to influence the energy of the room without overt action, demonstrated a skill honed over years of observation, practice, and intuition. They realized that while William and Harry represented power and defiance, she represented balance, control, and the potential for resolution. And yet, despite all her efforts, the tension remained. The confrontation had not ended. It had only shifted subtly. Kate's interventions had prevented immediate conflict, but they could not erase history, pride, or unresolved grievances. Every word, every glance, every movement was a negotiation, a delicate dance on a knife edge. Then came a subtle escalation. Harry's gaze met William's, and a quiet, almost imperceptible gesture signaled a shift. Kate sensed it immediately. The storm was not over. The confrontation had entered a new phase, one that required even greater skill, intuition, and diplomacy. She had to prepare for the next move, for the possibility that words alone would no longer suffice to maintain the fragile balance. The staff, now fully attuned to Kate's cues, tightened their focus. Every step, every motion, every whispered instruction carried enormous weight. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation, each heartbeat echoing the tension that hung over the brothers like a storm cloud. And as Kate positioned herself, ready to intervene once more, she realized that this Christmas would be remembered not for the decorations, the food, or even the gift exchange, but for the raw, unfiltered drama unfolding in the heart of the royal family. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered how much power distance can hold? How someone miles away can still shape the course of events in real time? That night, while the glittering halls of Windsor Castle were alive with tension, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, was thousands of miles away, but her presence was felt in every calculated move Harry made. She was unseen, unheard, yet undeniably influential, guiding, shaping, and perhaps even provoking the unfolding drama. The story of Meghan's influence begins not in the castle, but in the hours before Harry even arrived. Text messages, phone calls, and strategic advice had been flowing for days. Sources close to the couple revealed that Meghan had insisted Harry attend the Christmas celebration, not merely as a guest, but as a statement, a way to assert his place in the family, to remind the monarchy, and perhaps even William himself, that he could not be erased or ignored. Her guidance was subtle, almost surgical: push boundaries without outright confrontation, assert presence without creating irreversible rifts, remain composed yet unyielding. Even from a distance, Meghan understood the psychology of the palace, the delicate dynamics between her husband and William, and the ways in which timing, posture, and subtle gestures could tilt the balance of power. She had studied every public interaction, every interview, every leaked report over the years. She knew the fault lines, the pressure points, and the moments when history could pivot in Harry's favor. And so, Harry arrived at Windsor, carrying not just his own intentions, but the carefully considered influence of Meghan. Every step he took, every glance, every micro-expression was guided by strategy. She had trained him to read the room, anticipate William's reactions, and maintain an air of calm defiance that would keep him grounded no matter how intense the confrontation became. The moment Harry entered, Meghan's influence was palpable, even if invisible. He moved with purpose, exuding confidence while maintaining subtle respect. His choices, where to stand, when to speak, when to pause, were all calibrated to maximize impact while minimizing immediate fallout. To an observer, he seemed composed, almost effortless. But behind that composure was a web of advice and insight, rooted in Meghan's understanding of family dynamics and her keen sense of timing. Even Kate, acutely aware of every movement, noticed the deliberate precision in Harry's approach. She had seen him in public and private moments before, but tonight, his confidence was different, calibrated, almost surgical. Every gesture, every word, seemed designed not just to assert presence, but to deliver a silent message. And while Kate tried to mitigate tension between the brothers, Meghan's shadow loomed over every calculated decision. William, for his part, was immediately aware that this was not a casual visit. Harry's demeanor, the subtle confidence in his step, even the carefully measured tone of his voice, suggested that he had been guided, coached, and prepared. It was as if an unseen hand had orchestrated the moment, a hand that William immediately recognized but could not control. Meghan's influence was strategic, patient, and relentless, and it cut through the polished surface of Windsor like a sharp blade. The palace aides, watching quietly, began to sense the orchestration. They could see the invisible threads guiding Harry's interactions, the precision in his movements, and the deliberate timing of his gestures. Each staff member realized that this was no ordinary visit. Meghan had engineered a situation where Harry could assert his presence, challenge protocol, and force the family to confront unresolved issues, all while appearing calm, respectful, and controlled. And it worked. Harry's entrance set the tone for the evening. The tension was immediate, palpable, and nearly electric. William's initial reaction, a mix of shock and restrained anger, was precisely the outcome Meghan had predicted. She understood how William's mind operated, how pride and protocol intersected, and how to craft a scenario that would bring those forces to the surface. Every pause, every glance, every word that passed between the brothers was influenced by a carefully designed strategy, a blueprint Meghan had envisioned long before Harry left his residence. As the evening unfolded, Meghan's influence continued in more subtle ways. Texts and updates flowed throughout the night, reminders, guidance, and encouragement. Even from afar, she had a pulse on the situation, shaping Harry's responses and advising caution or escalation as necessary. She had anticipated moments of friction and prepared him for them, ensuring that he could navigate the delicate balance between assertion and diplomacy. Her influence was not just strategic, it was emotional. She reminded Harry of his priorities, his values, and his goals. She provided emotional support, the quiet voice that reinforced confidence when the stakes were highest. In a room filled with tension, where every glance could spark conflict, her distant presence gave him steadiness, clarity, and focus. Yet, Meghan's influence was not universally welcomed. William, ever protective of his authority and the sanctity of royal protocol, sensed that an external force was shaping the encounter. The subtle shifts in Harry's confidence, the careful timing of his gestures, and the precision of his words all pointed to guidance from an unseen source. To William, it was a silent challenge, an invisible hand altering the balance of power, complicating the evening, and testing his control. Kate, too, recognized the effect, even if she did not know the specifics. The calculated calm, the precision in Harry's demeanor, suggested external coaching, a guiding presence that amplified tension without overtly interfering. Her role, already delicate, became more complex. She had to mediate, stabilize, and protect the family's cohesion, all while navigating the invisible influence shaping Harry's actions. The dynamics were subtle, yet unmistakable. Meghan's influence turned a simple holiday gathering into a carefully orchestrated test of wills, strategy, and resilience. Every word spoken, every pause, every glance was part of a larger pattern designed to assert presence and demand recognition. It was invisible, yet undeniable, shaping the trajectory of the evening in ways that few in the room could fully comprehend. By the time the first course of dinner was served, the impact of Meghan's guidance was clear. The conversation, though outwardly polite, carried layers of meaning and intent. Every interaction was imbued with strategy, every response measured, and every gesture significant. The family, the aides, and even the staff sensed that they were not witnessing a typical holiday evening, but a carefully designed psychological encounter, orchestrated from afar by a woman whose influence transcended physical presence. And just when it seemed the tension might stabilize, a subtle provocation, a calculated remark, or an unintended glance threatened to ignite the room once more. Meghan's guidance, while stabilizing in one sense, had also set the stage for escalation, forcing confrontation and testing boundaries in ways that would define the rest of the evening. Have you ever wondered what it's like to stand between two brothers whose history is soaked in pride, rivalry, and the weight of a nation's expectations? That night, the guards and palace staff of Windsor Castle found themselves in exactly that position. Their role had always been to protect, to serve, to anticipate disruptions. But nothing in their training could have prepared them for a royal Christmas transformed into a battlefield of wills. From the moment Harry stepped onto the castle grounds, every movement, every glance, every subtle gesture became critical. The guards, standing rigid in ceremonial uniform, had been briefed for emergencies, but even they had never anticipated a scenario where one prince's arrival would directly challenge the authority of another in real time. Their instincts screamed that something unprecedented was unfolding, yet protocol demanded that they maintain composure and control. The senior officers immediately coordinated quietly, issuing subtle instructions to the front-of-house team. Staff members who had been working for decades, who had seen countless royal crises, from political visits to high-profile weddings, recognized that this was not simply a matter of managing appearances. This was a psychological battlefield, and every aide and guard had to act with precision. Their eyes followed Harry's every move, tracking his trajectory through the halls. Every step he took carried intention. Every pause, glance, or gesture had to be interpreted, measured, and, if necessary, countered. The tension in the air was thick, almost tactile, as if the very walls of Windsor were aware of the volatile energy swirling inside. Meanwhile, William's posture, controlled and deliberate, signaled to the staff that their vigilance was necessary. His every movement communicated authority, signaling both restraint and readiness. The palace aides understood immediately. This was no longer a ceremonial presence. It was a test of loyalty, a challenge to the hierarchy, and a potential trigger for confrontation. Kate, always the calming force, continued to move among the staff, issuing discreet instructions, offering reassurance, and ensuring that the flow of the evening remained stable. She positioned herself where she could observe the entire room, subtly influencing both the brothers while also keeping the aides and guards in line. Her presence was a stabilizing factor, but even her skills would be tested in ways that night had yet to reveal. The palace staff, now hyper-aware, began to anticipate potential flashpoints. Where would Harry stand? How would he approach the family? Which gestures or words might provoke a reaction? Every minor detail could have major consequences. Even something as simple as the placement of a chair or the opening of a door could alter the dynamics. The stakes were monumental. The reputation of the monarchy, the cohesion of the family, and even the optics of a global audience rested on their ability to navigate this invisible battlefield. The guards, trained for both ceremonial precision and crisis response, had to walk a delicate line. They could not intervene overtly, for that would escalate tensions and breach protocol. Yet doing nothing could allow a situation to spiral out of control. Every footstep, every glance, every gesture was calculated. They became the silent sentinels of history, aware that the eyes of the world, both seen and unseen, were watching their every move. And then came the first subtle breach of protocol, a whisper too loud, a movement too deliberate. It was enough to create ripples through the staff. Guards shifted slightly, aides paused mid-motion, and even the distant portraits seemed to bear witness. That small disruption was a reminder that no matter how experienced they were now mediators in a human drama far beyond their usual duties. The tension was amplified by the duality of their responsibilities. They had to protect the family physically, yes, but also emotionally and reputationally. Every interaction required discretion, every intervention had to be subtle, and every decision carried weight. A simple word could ignite conflict. A delayed response could create chaos. Their training had prepared them for crises, but this was unlike anything they had encountered. As Harry approached the main hall, the staff became a network of silent communication. Eyes met, nods were exchanged, and subtle hand signals ensured that everyone was aligned without drawing attention. The palace had never seen such. As Harry approached the main hall, the staff became a network of silent communication. Eyes met, nods were exchanged, and subtle hand signals ensured that everyone was aligned without drawing attention. The palace had never seen such synchronized subtlety. The aides, often invisible in the public eye, became the nervous, vigilant guardians of an unstable equilibrium, fully aware that history was unfolding before them. The presence of Harry alone introduced uncertainty. His calm confidence, the result of Meghan's guidance, challenged the careful order maintained by William. Every aide, every guard, every whispering member of staff had to anticipate reactions, ready to step in if the situation escalated. The palace, a centuries-old fortress of tradition, had suddenly become a live stage for negotiation, diplomacy, and human tension at its most raw. Even minor gestures from the brothers created ripple effects. A subtle tilt of the head, a raised eyebrow, a carefully measured pause. Each signal was magnified by the charged atmosphere. The staff responded almost instinctively, shifting positions, adjusting cues, and ensuring that the unfolding drama remained contained. It was a delicate dance, a game of anticipation, and a lesson in crisis management that no protocol manual could fully capture. The hours stretched, the tension mounting. Guards and staff alike were acutely aware that every second mattered, that a misstep could provoke confrontation, and that the eyes of the world were, in essence, part of the audience. Every glance, every movement was not only for the immediate room, but also for a global stage where perception could influence the monarchy's reputation. And yet, despite the careful orchestration, a sense of unpredictability remained. Staff could anticipate, predict, and guide. But they could not control human emotion, history, or familial bonds. They were witnesses and guardians, mediators and protectors, caught between centuries of tradition and the raw, unfiltered reality of two brothers facing unresolved conflict. Then, a subtle incident occurred, a whisper of movement, a gesture, something so minor it almost went unnoticed. But for the palace staff, it was a warning. The fragile equilibrium they had maintained teetered, hinting that the confrontation between the brothers was about to escalate. Every guard, every aide, every observer felt it. The storm had arrived, and history was about to be written in real time. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever watched a family fracture right before your eyes, where loyalties clash and years of history collide in an instant? That was Christmas 2025 at Windsor Castle. The confrontation between William and Harry was no longer contained to a silent standoff. It had rippled outward, touching every member of the royal family present. Each glance, each pause, each subtle gesture carried immense weight, and suddenly, the festive celebration was a battlefield of loyalty, pride, and unspoken judgment. The first signs of division appeared almost immediately. Cousins exchanged fleeting glances, uncertain how to react. Advisors and aides whispered quietly among themselves, debating how much intervention was appropriate. Even the Queen, observing from her reserved seat in a side room, sensed the shifting dynamics. The room, which had moments earlier been filled with the shimmer of holiday decorations and polite conversation, now vibrated with tension that was both palpable and unpredictable. William, as the future king, was keenly aware of his responsibility. Not just to his immediate family, but to the institution itself. Every move he made was calculated, every word deliberate. His authority was being challenged, and he could feel the weight of expectation pressing down from all sides. The staff's careful orchestration could only go so far. The unresolved issues with Harry were far more complex than protocol could contain. Harry, in contrast, carried the defiance of a younger brother who had spent years on the periphery of the family's central power. Every step he took, every word he spoke, was measured to assert presence and stake his claim, not just to the evening, but to his place within the family narrative. His defiance was quiet, controlled, and deliberate, yet it carried an unmistakable force that unsettled everyone around him. Kate, positioned between the two, tried to mediate as she had done for years. But even her careful diplomacy could not erase the undercurrents of resentment, pride, and historical tension. Her influence slowed the immediate escalation but could not resolve the deeper conflict, which had been simmering for decades. Each family member present was now faced with a choice: to side with William, to empathize with Harry, or to remain neutral in a room charged with unspoken allegiances. The subtle alignments began to emerge. Some senior aides and advisors naturally gravitated toward William, respecting his authority and long-standing leadership role. Others, influenced by previous experiences with Harry or sympathetic to his perceived exclusion, began to position themselves in ways that acknowledged his presence. Even cousins and extended family members, who had once seemed peripheral to royal disputes, felt the tug of this invisible divide. Charles, the king, observed carefully from his vantage point. He had spent years mediating family disputes and was intimately aware of the fragile equilibrium. Yet even he, seasoned in diplomacy and crisis management, recognized that this was different. The confrontation between his sons was no ordinary argument. It was an existential moment where pride, history, and perception collided. He understood that every move would carry consequences not just for the evening, but for the legacy of the monarchy itself. The tension grew as conversations became layered with double meanings. Polite exchanges masked subtle barbs, and ordinary questions about the meal or holiday plans carried undercurrents of judgment and challenge. Family members found themselves navigating a minefield of etiquette, emotion, and strategy, acutely aware that one misstep could escalate the conflict further. Meanwhile, the staff worked tirelessly to maintain an outward sense of calm. Aide after aide subtly adjusted placements, redirected movements, and whispered instructions to prevent an outright clash. Yet despite their efforts, the emotional currents in the room were increasingly difficult to contain. Even minor gestures, a tilt of the head, a fleeting smile, a paused step, were amplified by the charged atmosphere, interpreted as signals of allegiance or dissent. The psychological weight of the evening was further intensified by history. Family members carried memories of past conflicts, public scrutiny, and media attention. Every decision was influenced by layers of experience, perception, and expectation. In a room designed for celebration, every movement now became a negotiation of loyalty and alignment. Kate, aware of the subtle realignments, continued to act as the stabilizing force. She intervened where necessary, sometimes with humor, sometimes with gentle reminders, always with the goal of diffusing tension without taking sides. Her influence slowed the escalation, but she understood that the underlying divisions were deep and complex, shaped by years of unresolved conflict. The subtle fractures became more pronounced as dinner approached. Whispered comments, careful glances, and minor exchanges highlighted the divisions within the family. Some members began to question how much they should intervene, while others considered the long-term implications of remaining neutral. The once cohesive unit now appeared segmented, each faction cautiously aligning, each individual aware of the fragile nature of the evening. And yet, despite the visible divisions, the family maintained a veneer of tradition. Polite laughter, ceremonial toasts, and the formal rhythm of holiday proceedings continued, masking the deeper tensions. It was a delicate balance between public appearance and private conflict, a dance of diplomacy where each participant calculated every gesture and every word. Then, a quiet but deliberate provocation occurred. A subtle comment from Harry, a carefully placed glance from William, that reignited the underlying tension. Family members who had been trying to navigate the evening carefully were now forced to confront the reality of the divide. Every reaction mattered, every subtle choice had consequences, and the staff braced for the next wave of escalation. The royal family, once united by history and tradition, now stood divided in a room filled with centuries of ceremony. Loyalties were tested, allegiances were quietly formed, and the emotional stakes could not have been higher. Every observer, every aide, every family member understood that the events of this night would not simply be forgotten. They would be remembered, discussed, and dissected for years to come. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever seen a family's entire dynamic shift because of a single piece of paper? That night at Windsor Castle, a secret letter arrived. A note so carefully crafted, so deliberately timed, that it threatened to change the course of the evening, the relationship between brothers, and perhaps even the legacy of the royal family itself. The letter arrived quietly, slipped into the hands of a senior aide moments before the main dinner began. Its envelope, unassuming yet heavy, carried no insignia or obvious signature. At first glance, it seemed like a routine communication, a protocol note, a minor clarification, perhaps an update from a distant relative. But the aide immediately sensed the weight of it. Something about the envelope, the handwriting, the precise way it had been delivered, suggested that this was no ordinary message. William noticed it almost immediately. The subtle shift in the aide's posture, the slight hesitation as they handed it over, triggered the first spark of suspicion. His eyes narrowed. In a room already crackling with tension, the arrival of a mysterious letter was like throwing gasoline onto an open flame. Every staff member in the vicinity instinctively knew this was critical. The air seemed to tighten, the silence growing heavier with anticipation. Kate, attuned to every nuance, sensed the shift as well. She noticed William's subtle change in expression, the brief flicker of concern, the tightening of his jaw, the deliberate pause in his movements. She moved closer, offering calm reassurance without speaking, her presence signaling both support and alertness. The family, already strained by the confrontation between the brothers, was about to be tested further. Harry, unaware of the letter's arrival, continued to navigate the charged atmosphere, guided by Meghan's distant influence. He had anticipated tension from William, the staff, and the subtle currents of loyalty and expectation among family members. But he had not anticipated this. The arrival of a secret communication added a new layer of uncertainty, a variable that could alter the course of the night. The aide, after a subtle consultation with Kate and a quick glance at William, handed over the letter. William took it with deliberate calm, carefully breaking the seal and sliding the paper out. The room seemed to hold its breath as his eyes scanned the contents. The letter was concise, direct, and pointed. It contained reminders of past grievances, subtle warnings about conduct, and hints at consequences for actions that challenged the established order. Its tone was formal, yet imbued with emotional weight, striking a careful balance between authority and veiled threat. Every word was designed to provoke thought, to test resolve, and to influence behavior. William's expression darkened slightly as he read. His control, usually unshakable, was challenged not just by Harry's presence, but now by the weight of an external message arriving at a pivotal moment. The letter was a catalyst, crystallizing tensions that had been simmering for months, and even years, into a tangible, undeniable force. Kate, ever observant, noted the subtle change in William's demeanor. His measured calm was punctuated by brief flashes of intensity, a visible reflection of the internal conflict sparked by the letter. She knew that his next actions, guided in part by the contents of this note, would determine how the remainder of the evening unfolded. The family, sensing that something significant had occurred, leaned in subtly. Harry noticed the brief pause, the slight change in posture, and the intensity in William's eyes. He could not see the letter itself, but he understood immediately that an unseen hand had just entered the conversation. Meghan's influence had been distant and strategic. This was direct, precise, and emotionally charged. The aides and staff worked in tandem, ensuring that the letter's presence did not cause immediate chaos. They positioned themselves discreetly, adjusted subtle movements, and remained alert for any reaction that might escalate the situation. Every second mattered. The balance between maintaining decorum and navigating a potential crisis rested on their ability to respond with discretion. The contents of the letter carried more than reminders and warnings. They subtly framed the confrontation. They reminded William of his responsibility as heir, of the expectations placed upon him by tradition and history. They suggested caution, but also reinforced the stakes. Control, authority, and family cohesion were all at risk. Every word resonated with the unspoken message. The choices made tonight would be remembered, analyzed, and judged. William folded the letter carefully, his mind racing with strategy. He was aware that revealing its contents could escalate the confrontation, but ignoring it was not an option. Every decision had consequences. The room, already tense, seemed to thrum with anticipation, as if every surface and shadow knew that this moment would define more than just the evening. It could redefine relationships, power dynamics, and even the perception of the monarchy itself. Kate, sensing the magnitude of the moment, moved subtly to influence without overt interference. She maintained her role as mediator, guiding both brothers through the immediate reactions while preserving the larger balance of the evening. The staff, attuned to her signals, adjusted accordingly, creating an invisible network of calm and control amidst the undercurrents of tension. Harry, observing William's subtle reactions, began to realize that something had shifted. There was an intensity in William's gaze, a deliberation in his movements, and an almost imperceptible tension in the room that had been absent just moments before. Though he could not see the letter, he understood that an external factor was influencing the course of events, and that his next move would be critical. The arrival of the secret letter was a turning point. It crystallized the underlying tensions, brought hidden grievances to the surface, and forced every family member, aide, and staffer to reassess their positions. In a single moment, it transformed the evening from a tense standoff into a complex psychological chess match, where every action, word, and gesture would be measured against an unseen, authoritative message. And just as the first course of dinner was about to be served, William made a subtle decision. A choice informed by the letter, by his role as heir, and by the delicate balance of authority and family loyalty. The room tensed, the staff held their breath, and even Harry sensed that the next move could change the trajectory of the evening entirely. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever seen someone hold everything inside, only for it all to erupt in a single, undeniable moment? That's exactly what happened with Prince Harry on Christmas 2025. After hours of calculated calm, strategic gestures, and careful navigation of palace protocol, the tension finally reached a breaking point. The weight of years of estrangement, public scrutiny, and unspoken grievances pressed down until Harry could no longer contain it. It began subtly. A glance exchanged between William and Harry, heavy with history and unspoken accusation, sparked a reaction. A comment, seemingly innocuous, touched on old wounds. Frustrations about perception, responsibilities, and decisions made long ago. In that split second, the controlled calm that Harry had maintained, guided in part by Meghan's distant influence, shattered like glass under pressure. The outburst was not loud or explosive in the conventional sense. It was a mixture of sharp words, controlled passion, and piercing honesty. Harry spoke in a tone that was deliberate yet emotionally charged, each word carrying layers of meaning that only those who truly knew him could decipher. I've spent my whole life trying to belong, trying to prove myself, and yet I'm still treated like an outsider, he said, his voice steady but trembling with restrained emotion. The room seemed to contract, every ear straining, every breath held, as the words settled into the heavy air. William's response was equally measured, a combination of restraint, authority, and barely concealed anger. He didn't shout, but his voice carried the weight of expectation, history, and the authority of his position as heir. You were always part of this family, Harry, but showing up unannounced doesn't change the rules or the consequences of your choices. His words, calm yet cutting, struck at the core of the tension, highlighting both privilege and duty, loyalty and defiance. Kate, positioned between the brothers, immediately recognized the danger. She had seen the subtle signs, the flickers of emotion that hinted at an impending escalation. With practiced diplomacy, she stepped forward, her voice calm yet firm, attempting to mediate. "Let's pause, take a breath," she urged, but even she knew that some fires could not be fully extinguished with words alone. The emotional currents running between William and Harry were too powerful, too deeply rooted in years of perception, expectation, and history. The staff and aides, trained for decades in protocol and crisis management, watched with quiet tension. They understood that this was more than a disagreement. It was a confrontation that could redefine the evening, the family dynamic, and even public perception. Each movement, each gesture, each pause carried significance. Some aides subtly repositioned themselves, anticipating possible escalation, while others whispered strategic guidance to staff or attempted to signal calm to the brothers. Harry's words, though measured, struck at multiple points simultaneously. They addressed not just personal grievances, but also long-standing questions of recognition, inclusion, and respect. He spoke of feeling constrained by public perception, limited by tradition, and judged for choices that had been scrutinized relentlessly in the media. Every phrase was loaded with emotional resonance, historical weight, and the subtle authority of lived experience. William, in response, maintained a composed exterior, yet the tension in his jaw, the tightening of his shoulders, and the calculated pause between sentences revealed the depth of his internal struggle. He was balancing authority with familial loyalty, tradition with compassion, and personal pride with public expectation. Every decision, every measured word, reflected decades of preparation, training, and instinct. The room itself seemed to react to the confrontation. The golden candlelight flickered across polished surfaces, casting long shadows that mirrored the complex interplay of emotion.